And with that, welcome.
It is incredibly great to be here.
It really is. It's great to have you sitting down with us today for another deep dive. Pull up a chair, get comfortable, because today we're embarking on a journey into one of the most visually recognized stories in all of human history.
Oh, absolutely.
But we're looking at it through a completely new lens. Today we are diving deep into Genesis chapter 7, the story of Noah's Ark.
Right. And it really is a narrative that almost everyone assumes they just understand. You picture the little wooden boat, the giraffe head sticking out the top.
The painted rainbow at the end?
Exactly. It's on nursery walls everywhere. But when you look past those childhood versions of the story, when you actually dig into the text, the reality of what's being described is far more complex.
It's more intense.
Oh, a lot more intense than the pop culture image suggests.
To guide us through this today, we are pulling from the detailed study notes and commentary of two really distinct sources. We've got the Holman Study Bible and the NAA Study Bible.
Two excellent, rigorous sources.
Yeah. And our mission today is to uncover the surprising logistics, the exact timeline, spoiler alert, it wasn't just 40 days, and the fascinating deeper meanings embedded in this ancient text.
We really want to make sure you get a thorough, insightful exploration of this epic event.
Right, analyzing what the original authors were trying to communicate without, getting bogged down by the ancient jargon. Okay, let's unpack this.
Well, to start, we really need to address the passenger list.
The animals.
Yeah, the animals. The very first thing the text corrects is this deeply ingrained idea that every single animal just walked up a wooden ramp, 2 by 2.
Which is literally what every children's book shows.
Exactly. But the instructions given in the narrative were remarkably specific and highly categorized. According to the text, the command was to bring 7 pairs of every clean animal, as well as 7 pairs of every bird.
7 pairs.
Right. It was only the unclean animals that were brought in, just a single pair, 1 male and 1 female.
That is a huge departure from the mental image most of us have. But practically speaking, why would they need such a specific ratio? I mean, what even defines a clean versus an unclean animal in this ancient context?
So the study notes from our sources provide some crucial context here. The concept of clean and unclean animals is a major theological and practical categorization. It gets detailed much later in the Torah.
In Leviticus, yes.
Specifically in Leviticus chapter 11. But essentially, these clean animals were the ones deemed appropriate for human consumption.
Okay, food.
Food, yes. But more importantly for this immediate narrative, they were the animals acceptable to be offered as sacrifices to God after the flood.
Ah, I see. So if the goal was just to repopulate the earth, 2 of each would technically suffice.
Biologically speaking, yeah.
But if you only brought 2 sheep, and then you sacrificed one of them to say thank you for surviving the catastrophe well, you've just single-handedly made sheep extinct.
You've hit the nail on the head. The preservation detailed in the text wasn't just about raw biological survival. The commentary suggests it was about preserving a specific way of life.
Including religious worship.
And basic sustenance, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Taking 7 pairs ensured that these essential species had a robust enough population to fulfill those practical and ritual roles immediately after disembarking.
Without threatening the whole species.
Right.
It's a logistical detail that really grounds the narrative in a practical ancient reality. And, speaking of practical reality, we have to talk about the vessel itself.
Oh, the architecture.
Yes. The Holman source includes an illustration that completely shatters the typical image of a ship, with a pointy bow and a traditional curved hull. The researchers point out that the Ark might not have been shaped like a regular boat at all.
Right.
Instead, it could have been a massive cube.
Which naturally raises the question of how a giant wooden box survives a global cataclysm.
It sounds like a terrible design for a boat.
It does. But when you look at the historical and literary parallels of the ancient Near East, it starts to make a lot of sense. Both of our sources note this really fascinating connection to the Epic of Gilgamesh.
For those who might be unfamiliar, could you give just a brief overview of what the Epic of Gilgamesh is and why it matters here?
Certainly, the Epic of Gilgamesh is an ancient Mesopotamian poem, and it contains its own account of a great global flood that actually predates the written compilation of Genesis.
So it's older.
Yes. And when it was rediscovered in the 19th century, it caused a massive stir because of the striking similarities to the biblical account. In the Gilgamesh epic, a character named Utnapishtim is told by the gods to build a vessel to survive an impending flood.
Okay.
And in that text, the vessel is explicitly described as having equal dimensions, length, width, and height. is a perfect cube.
A giant floating cube sounds entirely counterintuitive if you're trying to navigate across a body of water.
That is precisely the distinction the commentary draws.
Hmm.
They weren't trying to sail anywhere.
Oh.
Yeah, the ark described in Genesis had no destination, no rudder, and no sails. Its sole functional purpose was preservation.
Just staying afloat.
Exactly. The Holman study notes point out that a cube shape in turbulent high seas would have definitely rolled around.
Which sounds awful.
It would have been an incredibly disorienting, uncomfortable experience for anything living inside. But structurally, a cube would have experienced far less violent agitation and bending than a long, traditional ship's hull.
Because a longboat would just break in half.
A traditional keel could snap right under the sheer stress of catastrophic waves. A reinforced box, however, is designed simply to bob and survive.
Just imagine the physical toll of that environment. You're inside a massive, windowless, rolling structure. And our sources highlight the terrifying scramble just leading up to this. The text notes that Noah was given a mere 7-day notice before the actual cataclysm began.
The logistics of those final 7 days, as outlined in the narrative, are almost unimaginably complex.
Thus 7 days.
The commentary emphasizes that loading this massive structure, accommodating all those animals in their specific 7-to-1 ratios, and securing their daily food requirements, it was a genuinely dangerous task.
You're corralling wild animals into a confined alien environment.
While the clock is rapidly ticking down.
It sets an incredibly tense scene, and then the door closes and the event begins. Which brings us to the actual mechanics of the flood. We often hear about the 40 days of rain, but the sources point out that rain was only half of the equation.
Right.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The actual mechanism of the flood, as described in Genesis 7, was far more violent than just a prolonged thunderstorm.
The language used in the text is catastrophic on a planetary scale. Yes, it mentions that the windows of heaven were opened, which describes the torrential, unrelenting rain, but it also explicitly states that all the fountains of the great deep burst apart.
The fountains of the great deep. It sounds almost like something out of a fantasy novel. What do the study notes say this physically represents?
The commentary explains that this phrase refers to a massive release of highly pressurized underground water.
Underground water.
Yes, we are talking about subterranean aquifers and underground oceans violently rupturing through the Earth's crust.
Wow.
It is described as a geological catastrophe where the soil and bedrock themselves are bursting open. The NAA source explicitly notes that there is no known modern natural phenomenon that perfectly corresponds to this description. It's presented as a unique, unrepeatable cataclysm.
Water cascading from above and water exploding from below.
Yeah.
The sheer terror of that concept is staggering, and the scale is given in very precise ancient measurements.
Yeah.
The text doesn't just say the water got incredibly deep. It specifically states that the waters prevailed 15 cubits above the highest mountains.
And to translate that for a modern audience, a cubit is an ancient measurement based on the human body, roughly the distance from the elbow to the tip of the middle finger.
Right.
The study notes calculate that 15 cubits equates to exactly 6.75 meters, or about 22 feet.
So, the narrative claims the water level was nearly 7 meters above the highest peak on the planet. Every possible refuge, every natural high ground, was completely swallowed.
Gone.
Which makes the security of the ark the only thing that mattered. And there's this one tiny, easily overlooked detail in Genesis 7, verse 16, that the commentary zeroes in on.
You're referring to the shutting of the door.
Yes. After everyone and everything is inside the structure, the text says, the Lord shut him in. The Portuguese study note highlights the phrasing, O Senhor fechou por fora.
The Lord closed it from the outside.
Exactly.
The commentary views this as a profound theological statement within the text. The notes stress that no physical detail is given to explain how this action was performed, but the symbolic meaning is undeniable to the original readers.
Right.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, according to the narrative, Noah spent decades building this immense, complex structure. He gathered the food, she brought in the animals, he did everything humanly possible, following strict instructions.
But it wasn't enough on its own.
Right. The authors of the Study Bible emphasize that the ultimate security, the final act that sealed their salvation from the chaotic waters, is portrayed as a supernatural divine action.
O Senhor fechou por fora. The idea is that human action was required to build the vessel, but it was insufficient to survive the judgment without that final, impenetrable seal provided from the outside.
That is the prevailing theological interpretation. It illustrates a recurring theme in these ancient texts, the intersection of human obedience and divine grace. And what was happening outside that sealed door was not just a destructive storm.
No.
The language analyzed in our sources is very specific and carries deep literary significance.
Right. The Holman notes talk about the specific Hebrew phrasing, which is translated in the Portuguese notes as desfazer a substança.
Unmaking the substance. The commentary emphasizes that the flood is presented as a literal reversal of creation. If you look back at Genesis 1, the narrative describes God bringing order out of watery chaos. He separates the waters above from the waters below to create a dry, safe space for life to flourish.
But in the flood narrative, that process is completely inverted.
Precisely. By opening the windows of heaven and the fountains of the deep, those foundational barriers are removed. The waters are allowed to crash back together.
It's terrifying.
The authors of the Study Bible emphasize that this narrative represents an uncreation. It is a deliberate, systematic unmaking of a world that the text describes as having become entirely corrupted, wiping out every single breath of life outside that wooden structure.
A systematic unmaking of the cosmos. That is a heavy, vivid concept to digest. It fundamentally shifts how you view the story. But now we really need to look at how long this unmade world lasted.
Yes.
Because if you ask anyone on the street how long the flood took, they will almost certainly tell you 40 days and 40 nights.
The text certainly uses that number, but the study notes point out how often modern readers misinterpret its total meaning. In the biblical narrative, 40 days and 40 nights is indeed the duration of the intense, world-altering rainfall and the bursting of the deep.
The act of destruction part.
Right. But what's fascinating here is the deep symbolism of the number 40 in the Old Testament. It functions as more than just a literal stopwatch.
Right. In ancient Near Eastern literature, certain numbers carry real theological weight. They aren't just data points. They signal a broader meaning to the reader.
And the sources provide excellent cross-references to demonstrate this. The number 40 is consistently used as an instrument of judgment, of testing, or of a significant transitional period of waiting.
For example.
Well, the study notes point out that both Isaac and Esau are recorded as being exactly 40 years old when they married. Moses is said to have spent 40 days and 40 nights up on Mount Sinai receiving the law.
And the Israelites.
Yes, the Israelites wandered in the desert for 40 years as a period of testing and purification.
So when the ancient reader hears 40 days and 40 nights of rain, they are hearing theological alarm bells ringing. They understand this as a period of ultimate divine judgment and testing, regardless of the literal meteorological data.
Exactly. The text operates on both a literal and a symbolic level for its original audience. But here is where the common modern understanding falls incredibly short. The rain lasted 40 days. Their time trapped inside that rolling vessel lasted much, much longer.
And this is where the NAA Study Notes provide some incredible clarity. They feature a meticulous day-by-day chronological table of the time spent in the ark.
It's fascinating.
And when you actually do the math based on the ancient calendar provided in the text, the total time spent inside wasn't 40 days. It was a staggering 370 days.
Over a full year.
Yeah.
Try to conceptualize that. Over a year inside a confined, windowless structure with thousands of animals.
Before we walk through the specific timeline, could you give a brief explanation of how that ancient calendar worked? Because the dates in the text, like the 17th day of the second month, they don't map neatly onto our modern January to December calendar.
That's a really important clarification. The chronological table in the NAA source is based on an ancient lunar calendar system. In this system, the year was traditionally divided into 12 months, but each month was strictly calculated as being 30 days long.
Resulting in a 360-day year.
Yes. The biblical authors use this consistent 30-day lunar month to track the duration of the flood with forensic detail, allowing modern scholars to map out the exact progression of events.
Let's walk through some of these specific dates because it really paints a vivid picture of what the text says they were experiencing. According to the NAA timeline, the flood happened in the 600th year of Noah's life. The 7-day warning was announced on the 10th day of the second month.
Right.
And by the commentary's calculations, mapping it out to a standard weekly cycle, that day was a Sunday.
And then, exactly 7 days later, on the 17th day of the second month, another Sunday, the flood officially begins. Noah, his family, and the animals enter the ark, and the door is shut.
Then you have the 40 days of relentless rain and subterranean eruptions. But after day 40, the waters don't just immediately recede.
No, they don't.
The text explicitly says the waters prevailed on the earth for 150 days. It isn't until the 17th day of the 7th month that the ark finally runs aground and rests on the mountains of Ararat.
And interestingly, the NAA chronology notes that this day lands on a Friday.
It's a moment of physical grounding after 5 months of floating endlessly in the dark.
But they're still nowhere near getting out. The tops of the surrounding mountains aren't even visible for several more months as the water slowly drains.
Right.
And then the narrative moves into the systematic sending out of the birds to check for dry land. First, a raven is sent, which just flies back and forth. Then a dove is utilized.
The study notes highlight a fascinating pattern regarding the timing of those bird releases. Noah sends out the dove, waits exactly 7 days, sends it out again, waits another 7 days, and sends it a final time.
It's very structured.
And the NAA chronology points out that every single one of those recorded bird releases happens on a Sunday.
The commentary suggests this highlights an incredible adherence to a weekly cycle. It shows a rhythm of timekeeping being rigorously maintained even when the outside world has been completely erased.
Wow.
According to the interpretation of the study notes, they are maintaining a Sabbath rhythm, a 7-day cycle of resting and acting while floating over a drowned planet.
It serves as a psychological anchor. You can't control the raging waters outside, but inside you can control the calendar. Finally, after sending the birds and after removing the covering of the ark to see the ground, they don't just immediately jump out.
No, they wait.
The text emphasizes that they wait for the earth to completely dry. They finally leave the dry earth on the 27th day of the 2nd month of the 601st year, which, according to the table, lands on a Wednesday.
Making the total time spent inside the ark exactly 370 days, it completely reframes how one reads the narrative.
It really does.
It is not a quick 40-day storm followed by a cheerful rainbow. It is presented as an excruciatingly long endurance test. It's over a year of tending to animals, smelling the confined odors, hearing the massive waters outside, and waiting in absolute faith for the ground to solidify.
So what does this all mean? We are sitting here today, thousands of years after this text was written, looking at incredibly specific ancient measurements. 6.75 meters of water, 370 days in a box, a weekly lunar cycle of sending out birds. Why should you, the listener, care about the exact logistics and mechanics of this ancient account?
Because stripped of the nursery rhymes, the researchers and commentators argue that this text offers a profoundly deep framework for understanding how human beings endure catastrophic floods in their own lives.
In our own lives.
Think about what the narrative portrays Noah and his family doing. They are plunged into total world-ending chaos.
Sure.
Everything they knew was unmade. Yet, what do we see in the text? We see an intense, deliberate dedication to order.
The meticulous counting of the days.
Exactly. They track the exact days, the exact months. They maintained the 7-day weekly cycle while trapped in a floating structure for over a year. They had absolutely no control over the subterranean waters rupturing the earth, but inside, they maintained their rhythm.
They maintained their purpose.
They fed the animals, they counted the weeks, they sent out the birds on a specific schedule. The commentary suggests this reflects a deeply human attempt to find meaning, structure, and hope during an overwhelming period of waiting. When you are in the dark and your personal world feels like it is ending, you keep counting the days. You keep your rhythms.
You find your order within the chaos. That is a highly applicable takeaway. You cannot control the storm that is raging outside, but you can absolutely control what you do inside the ark while you wait for the ground to dry.
The study Bibles emphasize that this is why historical and theological texts like this remain vital to study. They demand a thoughtful response from the reader. So I will ask you directly, as you are listening to this deep dive, what stands out to you? Is it the massive scale of the cataclysm, the subterranean oceans bursting forth in the unmaking of creation? Or is it the quiet, meticulous counting of days while waiting for the earth to dry?
It really puts our own periods of waiting into perspective, doesn't it? A few days or weeks of disruption in our modern schedules feels massive to us, but the text asks us to imagine 370 days of bobbing in an unmade world. That takes a different kind of endurance entirely. As we wrap up this conversation, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over as you go about the rest of your day.
A great way to end.
We discussed how the commentary interprets the flood fundamentally as a complete unmaking of a corrupted world in order to preserve a single seed of life and start over. Think about your own routines. What are the things in our modern lives or our own habits that occasionally need to be entirely unmade so we can start over on dry ground? Think about it.